Shalom, good afternoon from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Mr. Lowell Joseph Gallen, founder of the Root and Branch Association Limited, established in the United States of God of Israel, bless America in New York State in 1981, now celebrating our 42nd year. Today is Thursday, May 4th in the Gregorian calendar, year 2023. And it is the 12th day of the second Israelite Hebrew month of ER in the Hebrew Israelite calendar year 5783. Welcome to episode 58 of our now monthly Root and Branch Association Erev and Amalek Research Fellowship seminars, which began as almost 2 years ago as weekly medical war crimes seminars. We then expanded from medical war crimes to war crimes in general. And the medical war crimes are continued with our medical fellowship seminars established in August 2021 by Dr. Vladimir Zelenko of blessed memory. Now we have a very special, well, they're all special, but this is especially special because I'm having a reunion with someone I haven't been in contact with for about 30 years. We were both involved in exposing the truth of the Rabin assassination. The Root and Branch Association sponsored from about 1999 to 2002 annual conferences with Barry Chamish and other truth tellers. And I hope to take up that sword again in the fall with the our Root and Branch Association Rabin Assassination Research Fellowship. We know where the dead bodies lie, and we have not forgotten or forgiven. What is it? Don't forgive and forget. Absolutely right. So we are coming for you, whoever you are, wherever you are. Now, this seminar is chaired by the Rabbi Hananiah Weitzman of Jerusalem, Israel, a warrior for truth who won all the battles the last 3 years. He's one of the few rabbis who kept his integrity, honor, and dignity intact and survived. Unfortunately, about 95 to 98% of the rest of them sold out. And in my opinion, no longer qualified to talk to anyone about anything. They should go get jobs pumping gas. No disrespect to people who pump gas. Okay, and we have, as a guest speaker, Mr. Mordechai Sonis from the liberated Israelite tribal territory of Ephraim in the land of Israel. And now, without further ado, let me hand over the mic to our chair and our guest speaker. And before I do that, the rainmaking bit. Please support Rabbi Weissman's work. You can go to his website and buy his books, subscribe to his email, prolific essays. You can subscribe to Rumble and Telegram. And at the last I checked, Mordechai is now the news director at one of the world's most important organizations. That's not an overstatement. America's Frontline Doctors will include the links. Of course, absolutely, please support their work. They're real icebreakers and truth tellers blasting through all the BS, and we have the bad guys on the run. But like Gideon with his soldiers, we're not going to let them run. We're going to chase them all the way to the Jordan, and no one's going to get to the other side. Now, having said that, I'm handing over the mic to our chair, our distinguished guest. Gentlemen, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Lowell. Welcome to the program at Mordechai. It's really an honor and a pleasure to have you. I've been wanting to have you for a long time, and I'm really glad that we can finally work it out today. I want to jump right into it. Most of our audience probably knows you as a longtime news reporter for Arutz Sheva. You also did audio, radio broadcasts with them, and you wrote many articles on the website. And you publicly resigned from Arutz Sheva, or at least through a letter that was eventually made public. You resigned from Arutz Sheva over their coverage or lack thereof of COVID and the shots. Can you just give our audience a little bit of a background and the circumstances surrounding your departure from Arutz Sheva?
Sure. It's first, I just want to thank you for having me on. It's an honor also to be on Lowell's program. And I want to say that I've been aware of Root and Branch since 1986, when I became aware that I must move to Eretz Yisrael. In 1987, when I did move to Eretz Yisrael, Root and Branch was there, and he's really, the honor is all mine to be on this forum. And also sharing the forum with you. I believe that your opinion editorial in Arutz Sheva was the last one that I published before they issued their moratorium on opinion pieces without prior approval by the authorities there. And so it's really both of you have been very instrumental. And sure, I mean, what would you like to talk about? What is the first issue really?
Well, I guess, I mean, what would be, going back in time, what would be the first red flag that you saw that the censorship was not, ordinary censorship? Because I want to talk about this a little bit after the Arutz Sheva part, that not all censorship is bad. When people go to Arutz Sheva, they're expecting a particular slant on the news, meaning they don't want to see articles and op-eds favoring giving away the land of Israel to Arabs, for example. People who want that type of coverage can go to Haaretz and other media sources. So people are expecting certain types of content when they go to Arutz Sheva, and that's a sort of bias that we find acceptable because every media is a company. They do have to cater to their followers, but at the same time, certain types of censorship and biases are obviously on the wrong side of the ledger. That's crossing a certain line. So when in your mind did they cross that line where they were doing things that they were not really appropriate for the followers of the website? They were not being honest with them and not giving them the sort of coverage that they should have been receiving.
It's a great question, but I want to kind of go back and tweak the premise of the question because I think that it gets to the source of what we have to fix here, and also the reason for the existence of my current organization, Frontline News, what we do and why we do it. I have no intention to trash Arutz Sheva per se, or the people at Arutz Sheva who want to do the right thing, and they're good people, and all of those things need to be said. However, the very system, the very existence of something which is called a news organization, and what we mean when we say a news organization, what we expect when we tune into a news organization, and you asked all these questions about whether they should be publishing editorials that would be better to appear in another place, or if the slant of the news is perhaps appropriate. When did they cross the red line? And the thing is that for what they are and for what they're supposed to be, I understand what you mean when you ask when did they cross the red line, but actually as an institution, they couldn't have done anything other than what they did. And people need to understand that if they're going to understand where they're going to get their information from and how to judge whether something is true and factual, what is necessary information for me to know, and what is unnecessary and it's a diversion. Because really these organizations are in existence not to inform, but to divert. And we have to understand that. There are a few things we have to understand. Another thing we have to understand is that when people tune into any news organization, including Arutz Sheva, including Yeshiva World News, or any one, what's happening is that there's a relationship there where the reader assumes that he is the consumer who's being courted and somebody's selling him something. Although usually we don't have to pay for it. It's up there free, but they want me to click into their article and I'm the consumer and they're selling me something, but that is not true. You're not the consumer, you're the audience, and you're the product that's being sold. And you're the product that's being sold to the advertisers of the organization, the people who pay for it. You don't pay for it. The news that you get, you're reading it for free. Somebody pays for the person who's sitting there and he's writing the article. And the person who pays for it has very, very specific interests, not necessarily in line with the truth. But when a person goes to an organization, a news organization that he thinks is in consonance with his worldview, let's say that he went to certain institutions when he was growing up, and everybody knows that the news organization that represents our institution, maybe it's populated, it employs our people, our graduates. So you know that every single day you're going to get a group of stories, a bunch of stories. Everyone can only consume so much. Let's say if some people work and they have things in their lives going on, they could maybe read 3 or 4 or 5 stories. If people have more time on their hands, they can binge and they can read news all day. But no matter what it is, there's a limit to how much a person can read, and there's a limit to how much a person can understand. But these news organizations claim to give you what's happening in the world. They cannot tell you what's happening in the world. No single human being can know what's happening in the world. But what they're looking for are little examples, little snapshots and stories which enter into their constellation of significances that they're trying to give you and tell you, this is what you should care about, this is what you should worry about, and this is what you should be happy about. If a person will realize that that's really why he's going to the news, he's going to be told what to think and what to feel, so then maybe he'll look at the entire thing differently. Now, Arutz Sheva is an organization which I have called the most important news organization in the world. I may not necessarily say that today because there's another one which hopefully is aspiring for the title. But the reason that I said that Arutz Sheva is the most important is because it represents Judea and Samaria, which I consider to be the center of Jewish history and Jewish culture and life right now. That's a different discussion. But Arutz Sheva, having started with that mission and having succeeded after many struggles, they started on a boat and it was illegal. They were broadcasting outside of Israel's territorial waters, like A.B. Nathan's Voice of Peace. Eventually, many pirate radio stations popped up in the Israeli government. It was basically a question of many people were saying things against Israel that they didn't want said on the airwaves, and so they contrived the canard of the pirate stations interfering with the antennas at Ben Gurion Airport. And if you're going to listen to pirate stations, it's going to cause planes to start crashing, and we got to shut them down. Okay, so they went and they shut down the pirate stations and everything. Arutz Sheva. Different pirate stations did different things to survive. Some of them went satellite, some of them went on internet, some of them went official. Arutz Sheva actually had a special law that legalized it. There was a big uproar in Israel when they made the Arutz Sheva law. All the leftists were calling it an anti-democratic law, a fascist law,
the
Voice
usual.
of Peace.
Yeah, the
Voice
usual
of Peace didn't bother them. Yeah, but Arutz Sheva bothered them. In any case, once Arutz Sheva became official, once they became legal and respectable, their entire purpose was different. Then they must struggle to maintain respectability, maintain. There are certain things you can't go so far. There are certain issues which, how shall I say? There are certain. In order to reach positions in mainstream media organizations, one needs to have proved himself that there are certain questions that won't even occur to him to ask. If you were educated in the right places, so it's not even going to occur to you that somebody in the health ministry might be lying. How dare you? My editor told me that once. How dare you say such a thing? The health ministry, that they are trying to protect us, this holy institution in the state of Israel. I don't think that's the role of a journalist to think that way. But once you have these journalist organizations that represent a worldview, they're ours and they're theirs, and the Haredim and all the different ones, so then automatically you have that dynamic. And so automatically it's against it. It doesn't serve the purpose of truth. No news organization really serves the purpose of truth. But what we strive to do at Frontline News is to eliminate euphemism, which is a big war in the control of our minds. Let's say when an Islamic murder occurs and they call it terrorism, that is euphemism. That's to disarm us and to make us fuzzy thinkers so that we don't know who our enemy is. Because when we call someone a terrorist, we know nothing about what motivated him to do the attack. But when I know that he was a Muslim, I know exactly what motivated him and I know what I have to fight. And these examples are all over the place in the news. And so that's what we're trying to fight. And, I wish that at Arutz Sheva there would be some way for them to reverse it, but I think that it's inherent in the system that if they're going to exist as they do, and another thing, it's not just the advertisers. I also want to say that if they'll say something against the government, they will cease to receive invitations to government functions. They won't get the sources anymore. They'll be frozen out. So it's really, people have to understand that, it's almost a moral failing to allow the news, all the more so Facebook and all of those things, but to allow any news organization to dictate your thinking, and then bad consequences come from it. It's a moral failing. People have to understand that the news organizations are not their friends and they're not there to inform them. They're serving somebody's agenda, and you have to find out information yourself, and you also have to find out what is important and what is frivolous.
Yeah, and I want to zero in on one comment that you made that I wanted to talk about anyway, and that is that you said that the news sites are telling us what to think and what to care about. And that's really important, because even if in theory everything they were telling us was actually true, it's not necessarily the most important things, the things that we should be caring about. And people will remember several months ago, there was a whole uproar over Ben and Jerry's in Israel, yep, right? And not being able to sell their products in certain parts of Israel. And they were milking this story for weeks on end. That was not the most important thing in the world, but everybody was up in arms over this, when there were so many important things going on, especially with regard to COVID and the shots and other things that were going on in Israel, the loss of our freedoms. And yet the number one story for weeks on end was Ben and Jerry's, Ben and Jerry's, Ben and Jerry's. They were bashing us over the heads with it. That should have been a very minor item. And yet that was the first story. People are naturally going to care about what the news is telling them to care about. Why are people going to a protest over judicial reform and not over, Jews being tortured by the government of Israel and thrown in prison based on a confession being tortured out of them? Because the media and the organizations which serve each other are telling them this is what you should care about. This is what you should protest about. If the top headline every day was a Jew is tortured by his own government and his life is ruined because of this, you need to do something, people would care a lot more about that. And people don't realize the strings are being pulled because of that.
Yes. And the government will close them down quickly.
So that kind of leads into my next question about the military censorship. I mean, people also are not aware that news stories, and I don't know what else has to go through military censors before it gets published in Israel. I read somewhere that upwards of 25% of all news stories are stopped by the military censors. Is that accurate, first of all? And second of all, how does that whole process work?
Well, there is a military censor, and generally when somebody wants to publish something that has to do with army operations, so it has to be passed through the censor. That could also have to do with, let's say, if there were leaked documents that shed light on some kind of an historic event. That's something that I had to have. I acquired the plans for the Gaza expulsion before it happened. I could not get anyone to publish it until after it happened. But on the anniversary of the expulsion, Arutz Sheva did publish it. It exists. It's still there. Except that before publishing it, it was my translation of the Hebrew plans. They asked the military censor, and the military censor actually approved its publication. It's a very ignominious document, and it really shows what lengths the government is willing to go against their own people to wage psychological warfare against them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they approved it. And the process is that there's somebody, the editor or whoever it is whose job it is to deal with military affairs, sends it to an email, and whoever it is there that decides what has to be. I didn't ever have too much, it was a little bit, it was peripherally something I had to deal with, but, I don't know much more than that.
So it's actually really limited only to military affairs, because that could be, extended very broadly. If the state wanted to decide anything is dependent on state security, they would be able to kill a lot more stories. But it's really just limited to army operations and things like that.
Well, I don't know if it's limited. I mean, you would need to talk to somebody who's actively dealing with the Israeli censor now, because I think that the legal framework already does exist for them to call anything that they don't like terrorism or national security threat. And even if the legislation exists, it doesn't mean that they're using the powers yet. A lot of times there are laws there that they don't want you to remember exist. And so, 20 years down the line, the law will be pulled out. But yeah.
So then getting back to COVID, when we see that the censorship was so strong in COVID, from your experience, at least on the inside, was that really coming from the top down? Were they following orders from the government that you have to only write certain stories or portray things in a certain way? Or was it more in-house that people felt the pressure, this is what they needed to do, or this is what they really thought was the right thing to do? Where was the censorship coming from?
Here's the disclaimer that they attached to the top and the bottom of your op-ed, the last thing that I published there. The disclaimer said, Arutz Sheva expresses full support for the vaccination campaign and calls on the public to obey the instructions of the Ministry of Health and the professionals. In the op-ed section, we provide an open forum for a variety of opinions in order to provoke thought and discussion. Well, I don't know if it's a journalist's role to support vaccination campaigns and to tell people to obey instructions. I mean, I thought that the role of a journalist is to scrutinize every single thing that they say for contradictions, lies, inconsistencies, which there were many, many that came out of the health ministry. But instead, Arutz Sheva's policy was to transmit government communiques as factual truth, tell them to publish them without revealing that the source was the health ministry, and thereby foist a product of public relations on an unsuspecting public. An example was the whole thing surrounding Rav Kanievsky and whether he did or did not say to take the shot.
I was just going to bring that up next, as a matter of fact.
Well, that was the one. So we received the press kit from the health ministry with the picture, with the recording, with the text, with the headline, with everything, and we were told to publish it as as if it was news, as if the news came from us, and not to reveal where the whole thing came from. And that's theater, and why would they do it? Because they believed. I mean, you heard in the in their disclaimer that they fully support the vaccination campaign. They call people to obey. So it's Leninist. I mean, they don't realize, but they've slipped to totalitarianism. And their information policy will serve whatever the government says. And if it means to lie, if it means to if I say lying, I call it lying. Let's say not revealing the whole truth of the source of the story, which
Right, because
that's
the
pretty
average person reading the story about Rav Kanievsky's so-called psak, and it really wasn't a psak at all, would think that Arutz Sheva had a man in the room at the time, or at least was very close to the source and verified all the information, because they wouldn't dare publish a story if they didn't get their facts straight, when it was just all coming from the government. They didn't ask any questions at all.
It isn't that way. Unfortunately, there are constraints, and a news organization has so many people to write, and those people can write so many articles per day. And when usually it's too much work for not enough money, and that means that when they come across a press release which is written nicely, whether it's from a good organization, a bad organization, any kind of organization, let's say the Anti-Defamation League. The Anti-Defamation League knows how to write a press release. And so somebody who has a lot of articles to write in a little amount of time, and he finds press releases that have something that you can just copy and paste and stick it in there. So that's great, and it happens a lot of times that there are things which get published just because of that reason. It's a matter of constraints, it's a matter of, this is the way it is now. You can only publish so much news in a day, and you can only publish so the job of the editor is that of a curator. He must decide, what are we, the thing that goes in his mind, or what are we going to give them? What are we going to tell them? What are we going to reveal to them? When you're already thinking in that way, you're on a chair, on a throne, high up on Mount Olympus, and you're deciding, what's good for them and what's bad for them. And that's a totalitarian mindset.
So the next question is, how sensitive are they to user feedback and reader feedback? Because I see that the comments to the editorial that I wrote against Rabbi Steinberg, or Avram Steinberg, I don't call him rabbi anymore, that was the one that really exposed Arutz Sheva's bias, brought it out into the open. The comments were all in favor of that article. I sent that article to you when you put it up on the website. Then I went to shul for Mincha Marav. I came home an hour later. My email was flooded with messages from people I never heard of. So thankful that finally somebody was speaking out about this. And you would think that Arutz Sheva would see this watershed moment, that there's this other side that really wants to be heard, and these are their fan base. They would give them more of what they were looking for. Instead, they just doubled down on that. So how much of this is really a business question or a laziness question? But at some point, they have to realize that their fan base is turning against them, and it's bad for business. Why wouldn't they change their policies?
I think it's been that way for a long time, and they don't have to change their policies. I noticed in the articles that I would write, I had a fight with my editor just about every day for the things I was publishing. Doctors, scientists, experts who were saying things contrary to what the government was putting out, and they just did not want it. They didn't want to hear it. Didn't want it published. Every so often I slipped it through. Too much I slipped it through. But it's, what can I say? It's very difficult when there are interests that are hidden and people aren't aware of them, for something truthful to come out. And people really need to they need to choose very well. It's not, people who are careful about what goes into their mouth but not careful about what goes into their mind are making a mistake.
Well, we have to get our news from somewhere. So knowing all this, where can we go? People are still going to Arutz Sheva because they say, okay, maybe they got it wrong about COVID. But in general, they're still fighting for us. They're still the so-called right-wing, Dati, they're our flagship news source. They're still trusting them about other things, even though they might be a little bit leery. Where can a person go to get, as close to the source as possible? We can't all be citizen journalists, and we don't have time to get to the source on everything. We have to trust somebody to do the work for us. Where can we go at this point to get news that we can reasonably trust?
Well, the question is, what news? I mean, if news is for entertainment, if we're going to continue to use news as we've been using news, so then, yes, we should find trustworthy news sources, which I say, I'm not embarrassed to say, Frontline News, I'm very proud of. And our writers are people who were all picked for their ability to withstand the pressures during the COVID years. We've got a couple of great Talmidei Chachamim writing for us, other people who have deep understanding in medical matters, and a really, really good group. And we're always trying to improve our ways of telling the truth in a way which doesn't include any political euphemism, political correctness, saying a thing as it is, and getting the information that should be gotten out by the bigger news organizations, but they won't because of all the reasons that we discussed. So Frontline News, the link is frontline.news, and you can find it there. We have a page in English and in Spanish and in Portuguese. Portuguese is a very interesting sort of section of the site, because Brazil is a country that's going through a lot of upheaval and turmoil right now. And the Portuguese speaking audience, it's like a seesaw. Our American readers and our Brazilian readers, sometimes these are more and sometimes these are more. And then besides that, our Spanish site is read all over South America, Spain, and every place where Spanish is spoken, including the United States. And really, you can see there everything that you can find in other news sources, except what I would say more what you would expect to find in the news when Mashiach comes, or hopefully. We have a lot more good news. We have a lot more praise for people who are doing things out of principle. And generally, our editorial policy is deliberately subservient to transcendental values, and that means that we are dedicated to telling the truth and fixing all of the things that make all of us angry when we read the papers. Arutz Sheva, my articles, I would note the same thing that you noticed. In the comment section, the positive to negative were 5-1, 7-1, 15-1. It could be sometimes. The occasional negative comment to one of my type of articles would be, how can you allow this irresponsible type of thing, on Arutz Sheva? And the rest of them were just like you said. Nevertheless, they ignore it because they don't have to. What's going to happen if you don't like our article? You'll thumb your nose at us. That's all. You can write something in the comment section. Well, you see it all the time. It's not just their COVID coverage. It's coverage about a lot of things that, but again, it's not a Arutz Sheva bashing because for, it's a mix. It's very mixed. There's a lot of good stuff there. There's a lot of stuff that would be good, but what do we really need? What do we really need to know? How much does it take away from our time doing the things that we really should be doing? When that includes, learning and family and all the stuff. And especially, there are bad times coming, or let's say there are harder times coming. There are times coming when the Jewish people are going to need extra special protection. And we know that Chazal told us that in these times, we see it all around us. The thing that will save us is Torah and Gemilas Chasadim. What the direct connection is to saving ourselves in a time of global cataclysm by learning Torah and doing Gemilas Chasadim, that's probably also the subject of another talk. But I think that consuming news, and I'm saying this is a news director who's saying this to you, but I'm saying consuming news should be low on a person's set of priorities. A person should be learning how to grow his own food today. A person should be making local contacts with the people who are like-minded, and to know how to survive times when currency isn't going to be available, cash isn't going to be available. All the things that they're saying very openly are coming. Food sources in the world are being destroyed. There are banks already that have stopped giving cash services, and they're getting more and more. And what's going to happen when there's no more cash, and your ability to purchase or do anything to live is dependent on whether the government considers you, an acceptable citizen. We've seen it. We saw the brutality. We saw police smashing people's faces into the pavement for resisting arrest over not wearing a face mask, or resisting a fine for not wearing a face mask, after the government already admitted that the face masks had no medical value. They knew that when they mandated it, but they mandated it for the purpose of education. So this is education to totalitarianism. This is mainly to make our children accustomed to slavery, and and to make parents accustomed to abusing their children, and to looking the other way when very bad things are happening. That's another very, very bad thing that happened to society during COVID, looking the other way. And looking the other way happens also in editorial policy. in newspapers. That's actually where it comes from. So, we strive to be a newspaper that doesn't look the other way. But still, it's not, don't live off of a newspaper. It's not what should tell you how to think and feel. The Sfarim should tell you what to think and feel.
Yeah, I actually spoke about this a little bit last night on my shir. I touched on it. We had last week approximately 600,000 Jews, probably from the best of our people, coming to protest a bunch of theater. It didn't change anything. It's not going to change anything. It was all orchestrated by the media and by the organizations. Imagine if you had
pressure release mechanism.
I'm sorry?
It's a pressure release mechanism.
Sure.
The government sits and laughs.
Imagine if those 600,000 Jews, instead of protesting the judicial reform or the lack of judicial reform, which is all a waste of time anyway, it's not going to change anything in their lives, which tyrant has more power over them. They got together and they davened. Imagine 600,000 people all publicly turning to Hashem, doing kiruv, studying Torah together, doing something really positive from a real Torah standpoint. That would shake the heavens and the earth, as opposed to just waving flags and chanting slogans and having a good time out, feeling that they did something. They could have really done something positive from a Jewish spiritual sense. And I think that opportunity was wasted because the media pulled their strings a certain way.
I believe that. I agree with that, but I think that it should go further. I think that there's more that can be done than just davening. Although I don't want to say just davening, because that's, I don't want to say anything that borders on heresy. But there is something that we can do, and there's a lot we can do. And I think that a lot of people say they want Mashiach, but when confronted with a really daring thought, something which is different and something which doesn't contain any of the stereotypical extremist, explosive, flamboyant, violent visions, but there is something that can be done. Let me tell you something. If you look at the chart of countries in the world where the country calls itself a democracy, but in order to vote in that country, it's mandatory. That means that you get a fine if you don't vote. They don't tell you who to vote for, and you can put a white paper in the thing, but you have to vote. What does that mean? What does that say about democracy? And what does that say about the entire system of voting and all these things? I don't like to talk about leaps of faith, but let's do an exercise in imagination for a second. Let's imagine a situation which does not exist, I admit, but it's something that could be worked towards, something that could be worked towards legally, but it's a vision, because I don't see it today, maybe one day. Let's say there were 5 or 6 communities in Judea or Samaria that have come to the conclusion after all these years that it doesn't matter which party you vote for in the Israeli elections, you're going to get the same results. They're going to promise you one thing before the elections, and then afterwards they're going to behave the opposite. And instead of merely abstaining from voting, instead of merely mimicking an apathetic voter and not voting, they gather together en masse and sign a document which says that we declare that the whole thing is illegitimate and we are not participating. We're not going to come to the voting booth and put in a white petek. We're not going to come to the voting booth and put in a ballot that says, I vote for the Messiah. But we as a community are not voting because you are not legitimate. The whole thing is not legitimate. Okay. And imagine that not just one entire community unanimously signed such a declaration, but 5 communities signed such a declaration. And there's a danger that maybe a 6th and 7th, and people are starting to hear about it. Now, can you imagine what a situation of panic would prevail among the authorities? People are starting to hear that the game is up. They don't believe in it anymore, because you see, when you vote, you're saying, and this is the reason why it's mandatory in so many countries, you're saying that no matter what happens, I agree with it, because fair and square. Either your candidate won, and so what are you complaining about? You voted for him. Or your candidate lost, and you participated in democracy, and you lose a few, you win a few, and that's the way it is. It's legitimate. But it's not legitimate. It's not legitimate for them to kick Jews out of their homes that they sent them to go live there. Even if they wouldn't go send them to live there, it would be legitimate for them to kick them out. All the more so when they were homes that were established by Israeli governments, and they're kicked out with brutality and violence, and releasing murderers with blood on their hands, releasing would-be murderers without blood on their hands. All of these things. Can you imagine what would happen if the government saw that there was a spreading movement of people who are saying that the entire democracy is a sham, and people are starting to hear about it? What they would do is the first thing they would do is they would start with the velvet glove, and they would invite the leaders of the movement to a nice hotel and ask them what they want. And they would offer them a lot of things that you wouldn't imagine that they would offer. You want us to, I don't want to speculate. I've speculated enough, but in the end, I think that the religious Zionists would do what we would expect, and they would come to some kind of an agreement, and they would say, "Oh, the government promised to fix this, this, and this," and they would, make a l'chaim and dance and say, and they would miss the entire opportunity. Well, what should happen is that they would remain steadfast, and the movement should spread, and then once there would be a real ability and an opportunity to establish a government of Jewish constitutional democracy, as envisioned by Professor Paul Eidelberg, for example. It would be the opportunity to get rid of this kind of hybrid beast that Israeli law is, with British common law and Turkish law and some Jewish law to make it kosher style. It would represent the real ability of the people to use the power that they have, that they don't realize they have. If we realize the inner meaning of the laws in countries that force people to vote, even if they don't want to vote for anybody, then we'd understand how much power we have in such a tool.
Look, it would be even more powerful if it wasn't just a settlement thing, because across the spectrum of Israel, a lot of people have lost faith in the system, and they realize that the definition of a democracy is not that merely I get to choose between a certain number of puppets that are then going to be tyrants and not care about what we actually want, but that the will of the people is done at least some of the time. I mean, the will of the people is never done, and we don't get anything that we want as citizens. They don't care what we have to say. They don't care. They just basically impose their will on us. They try to do it gently to be able to get away with it more of the time, but they don't care what we have to say about anything. So regardless of who we vote for, we still have tyrants ruling over us. It would be much more powerful if there was a unified effort across all the spectrums, left wing and right wing and religious and secular. It shouldn't make any difference. The will of the people is simply never being done. They don't care what we have to say. I think that would be a much more powerful movement. Anyway, I want to switch gears and get back to a little bit we were talking about before. First of all, I want to say that you are a living example of somebody who stood up to the pressure, because you were working at Aracheva for a long time, and you gave that up. And a lot of people were faced with a choice: either follow along with the narrative, to keep a low profile, even if they didn't like the narrative, just to keep a low profile, keep their heads down and keep their jobs. You gave up a job, and that's always an uncertain thing to do. And Baruch Hashem, you wound up with something that I would venture to say is probably much better and much more satisfying for you. And a lot of people, I think most people did the very cowardly thing. They kept their jobs because they're worried about how they're going to pay their bills. They didn't have trust in Hashem to take care of them. They didn't do the right thing. That would also be a much more powerful movement. People are willing to give up their jobs, realizing if you lose one job, you're able to get another job. Life doesn't end when you lose a job. I've lost jobs. I've left jobs in my life. People change, people's careers change. It's not the end of the world to give up a job, especially if you really believe that your livelihood comes from Hashem. You do the right thing and trust in Hashem to take care of you. You are a living example of somebody doing that, and it worked out okay. I think if more people did that they couldn't just hold the specter of the job over the person. I'm just doing my job, right? I just have to do my job. I'm following orders. That would also suck away a lot of power from the bad guys. Any comments?
Yes, I agree. Well, I agree. The thing is that people, again, we have to look at the root. Why did it come out this way? Why were so many people such cowards? I think it was because of the education they received when they were institutionalized in schools. Schools are places where people learn to be quiet, look the other way. All the roots of what you found, in the thing that you're describing, I believe started there. It's a big subject, but yes, I think that people should strive more for principle and not loyalty to a source of power.
Okay, so now I want to touch on the really hot button topic, and that is the media's coverage of the D family following the terrible attack against their family. Of course, they lost a mother and two daughters, and the media has made like a rock star out of this Rabbi Leo D. Now, it's a sensitive issue, because on the one hand, of course, when somebody's gone through something like that, which is unfathomable, nobody should know of such a thing, it's very hard to criticize them, and I don't want to criticize him personally. On the other hand, when somebody's making public statements that are being widely broadcast, and it seems to be accepted from all corners of the media, the Times of Israel and Aracheva and everything in between all seem to agree that these comments are very positive. it's very dangerous because that sort of sets people's way of thinking. It can impact public policy, and it makes us all less safe. So I'm not going to criticize the person. He seems like a very good-hearted person. From all accounts, he seems like a very good person who means well and really believes in what he's saying. But on the other hand, some of his public statements, I think, are very misguided and very dangerous. And I want to focus on two of them in particular. Feel free to comment on others. One of them is, and this is more than the media blowing it way out of proportion, the fact that the organs of, I think, the mother in particular were donated to several people. Somebody shared with me, I think, that the kidney of the mother went to actually an Arab. So I don't know how people might even feel about that. An organ donation is a very, very sensitive topic in Jewish law. There are very great people on both sides of the issue. At what point is a person considered to be actually dead according to Jewish law? And then you're able to take the organs to help save other people's lives. But the media is portraying it as a cut and dry. It's a good thing all the time. And, especially when it comes to the heart, where the person, if the person is dead, the heart is basically not going to be useful to anybody else. And it leads into a situation, of course, I don't know what happened over here, but it's very easy for doctors to want or feel pressured to declare a person dead before they're actually dead because they want to get the organs out of the person. It's a very sensitive issue. And for the media to just say, it's great, look, all these lives were saved, even in their death, they were doing chesed and saving people's lives, is very irresponsible. And because people are going to be afraid to challenge the narrative because they'll feel that that's being insensitive to the D family, it can change the perception of something which is a very critical matter of Jewish law and can actually be harming lives. And the other one, before I get to response to that, is I think that the more famous comments, and that is, it seems at every opportunity saying he doesn't harbor any hatred towards the terrorists or to the society that produced these terrorists. He has a lot of friends among the Arabs. He calls them Palestinians. There's no such things, but they're his friends and they're wonderful. He trusts them in many cases even more than he trusts his fellow Jews. It's sort of like this love affair with people who murdered his own family. And if he personally feels that way, if that's how he expresses his love, he wants to be like Aaron, an Ohev Shalom and a Rodev Shalom, that's his business. But Aaron, anyway, who was the greatest Ohev Shalom and Rodev Shalom, he's the paragon for that. He went to Paro and he was participating in the Makos against their enemies. He was an Ohev Shalom and a Rodev Shalom for his fellow Jews, not for the enemies. He was very tough against their enemies. But if that's his personal opinion, that's fine. When it's being broadcast, however, and portrayed in the media as this very positive thing, it's very dangerous because it's broadcasting weakness, that the terrorists can trample all over us and we're going to respond to them with love. And even if there are a few Arabs that if you could sit down and talk to them as human beings, you'll be able to turn them around. But overall, it's broadcasting a message of weakness, not strength, which is very dangerous. And that's what the media is broadcasting to everybody.
Yeah, that's right. I think that the media, again, we should look at everything in its broader context. I have always thought that we lost a long time ago the concept of obscenity in the media, and that when there is an attack or a murder, let's say of a soldier, chas v'sholom, and they show and they broadcast crying, weeping soldiers over the grave, that's a wrong thing to do. It demoralizes us and it makes the enemies and the attackers laugh, and they're very, very happy. It's a wrong thing. It's totally demoralizing. And the same thing, that same sort of mindset for sensationalism and getting the story. And look, they're scavengers. The media are bottom feeding scavengers, and they know that if they don't get the story, everybody else will. And so as a matter of survival, they have to show everybody in their moment of pain, and they have to show what everybody says in a moment when they may have said something different when they were in a more sane state of mind. I wish the media would be so quick to report the words of Rabbi D when he was writing during the Corona regime. Rabbi D was also, it's very, very interesting, but he was against the mandates. He was against government policy. I'll read you a quote from him, and I'd like to know where this was on Arutz Sheva. Quoting Rabbi D in his own blog, "As King David said, give me God's punishment any day over man's. Give me coronavirus over the harsher human response. Save our health resources for making people well and don't fritter them away on pointless home arrests. I believe that given the choice, King David would have opted for catching the virus rather than taking the vaccine. He would have risked God's curse over mankind's mismanagement. And I'm glad to have achieved natural immunity without being forced to take an experimental vaccine." Now, that's the Rabbi D who I believe is speaking from Yishuv Adas. He's calm, and he didn't just pass through a family tragedy. And whatever he was quoted as saying today, yes, there are many flaws in those words, and I think that First of all, again, you can't, I don't even want to pick it apart, because it's really just why should the media go and report, what he says in his time of grief? I just think it's wrong. I mean, if you really want me to, I can relate to the words themselves. That, what's wrong with wishing, well on the terrorists, whatever those are, but I'm not a psychologist, Frankly, I don't even think psychologists are psychologists, but I'm certainly not one, and I can't begin to to fathom what might be going on in the mind of somebody who went through what he went through. But I just know that he is capable of saying some very, very incisive things, and I think that we should take very seriously the things that he wrote before the tragedy, and not be focusing so much on the words of somebody whose life was shattered.
The fact is also just because somebody is the victim of a terrible attack on his family, that doesn't necessarily make him an expert in the right way to respond to it. Similarly, when Gilad Shalit was captured by Hamas and he was held captive by them. So the father was putting a lot of pressure on the government, and he also got a lot of pressure at the time to do everything possible to get him out, to free 1,000 terrorists from the prisons if you have to get that one life back. And people were saying, maybe he's not the best person to be weighing in on this, because of course he's going to do what's best for his son, and he's not necessarily capable of looking at the big picture. He shouldn't be the one to be setting policies. And then the counter argument would be, well, what if it was your son? Well, what if it was my son? I hope I would be able to think clearly and do the right thing. But granted, I might not be objective, and I might not be the best person to be weighing in, being that that's the case, because I'm too much of a personal vested interest in the matter. And I think it's the same thing over here. Just because somebody's a victim of a terrorist attack doesn't suddenly make him an expert to be setting the national policy. And the fact is also, the media has a lot of victims of terrorism, unfortunately, to be able to choose from, to make their media darlings and give a spotlight to. I don't see them giving mics to people who say that we should torture the terrorists to death and burn down their villages. That's not the message that the media wants. It's not the message that the establishment wants. So therefore, it's the message of love and peace, and I don't want vengeance against our enemies. That's the one that's getting the most attention, because that's the one that suits the agenda.
I agree.
Okay, so let's see some of the questions. I see a lot of comments have come in. I want to give people an opportunity as well, because we don't engage in censorship here, and we do believe in democracy, giving everybody a voice. So let's just quickly scan through this over here.
To a point.
Yeah, so let's see here. Okay, here's some comments. Any questions? Okay, does Frontline News also use Reuters AP? If yes, how is the information from these sources verified? How do they decide what information / report is worth publishing? You want to take that?
Well, we actually have a project that we're working on to explain their fact checkers, Reuters and AP's fact checkers. No, we don't receive the feed from Reuters and AP, and they are not our news sources. Our news sources are either local sources, people whose stories we can verify, but in short, no, we are not, we don't regurgitate what the mainstream conglomerates put out. Generally, you'll find the stuff on our site that you will not find on any of those sites. Check it out. But no, the answer is no.
Okay, that's good to know. David also pointed out as well, he was also shocked, and I was as well, when you shared about Rabbi D being against forcing the vaccines on people. That's certainly not something the media would have shared with us at the time. He wrote that on a blog, and it's certainly not something they're going to mention in his articles today, because it doesn't suit the narrative. If for example, somebody like him came out and said, maybe stop the gay parades in Israel, because maybe we're being punished, Hashem is not happy with these sins, I don't think the media would publish that at all or give him the microphone. And if they did, they would only be doing it to slander him and mock him, because again, it doesn't suit their narrative. And people really have to be careful when they're reading the media and say, why am I reading this story in this place, written in this way? What do they want me to think when I finish reading the article? We really have to approach, because we're not going to stop looking at media sources, even though we know that they're all biased and flawed, but we have to go into it knowing that we're entering a place of tumah, that we're entering a place where they're trying to get into our minds. And we have to have like a sort of a watchman in our mind saying, first of all, what are they trying to get out of me? Is this something that I can trust? How does this fit with the Torah before we allow them to alter our views on anything?
Yes.
Okay, one more question here, also from David. How is Dr. Gold doing? You want to give us an
Well,
update?
Dr. Gold is fighting. Dr. Gold was the victim of a terrible attack for, no good deed goes unpunished. For her effectiveness and for the message that she brought to the United States and to the world. So she is the victim of a takedown attempt after having served time in jail and everything. But she's a fighter. It's not going to change who she is fundamentally. And it's just a question of, knowing how to go on, and she's going on. But yeah, it's thumbs up. Everyone is very, very inspired by Dr. Gold, her leadership, and we're very, very grateful for her role in putting together Frontline News.
Yeah, I also have to give her a personal debt of gratitude. I never spoke with her, had any contact with her, but when we were very early on in the COVID era, to my shame, although not too much to my shame, I was wearing a mask in the beginning, although I was always skeptical of it, and I didn't wear it when it wasn't absolutely necessary. But I heard a speech that she gave where she said that, if you wear the mask and you're able to smell smoke when people are smoking, then any virus particles, germ particles are certainly going to be able to get through that mask because they're smaller than that. And it sort of clicked in my mind, of course, it's so obvious that that's not really going to be doing anything good for my health. So that really helped push me over the line to stop wearing the mask in those early days. It was just a voice of sense and reason, science as well, but also just common sense, which I think was really absent at the time and still is today to a large extent.
Yes.
Okay. Any other points you wanted to touch on that I might have missed in the questions, because we're going to wrap it up soon? Anything that I missed that you want to share with us?
Well, the problems that we face and the differences in the media organizations as they exist and as they should be, I think, come down to a fundamental question, and that is whether the purpose of man is to live through life with a minimum of effort, a maximum of comfort, or whether one's life should be a life of strenuousness, achievement, and great rewards. And I think that the entire Western world and the Western democracies are built upon the former. And that comes out in our medical practices. We want something quick and easy. The more that it involves difficult lifestyle changes, the less we want it. The more it's just a pill that you take or a shot that you take, or whether it's the information that we take in. We want things easy. We want somebody to tell us in sound bites. Really, it requires an entire change in outlook. And, again, I think that a person should turn less to media and more to the classic works that have stood the test of time. Newspapers are tomorrow's fish wrappers, but the books that we have and the tradition that we have is something that they're words of truth and they never die. I suppose that's a good place to end.
That's an excellent place. And thank you very much, Mordechai, for all of your hard work, for coming on the show, for putting up my articles in Aretz Sheva when there was still a window of opportunity to do so. It took courage, and I really appreciate that. And I really just appreciate all the work that you are continuing to do. You're really inspiring me and inspiring a lot of others, and they should follow in your footsteps. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks to you and to Lowell.
Lowell, you want to wrap it up?
Yes, so we, on behalf of our viewers and listeners and live studio audience, we want to thank Hanania and Mordechai for today's Erev Rav and Amalek Research Fellowship Seminar, episode 58, and we will see you hopefully in a month. And again, the rainmaking bit, please support Hanania's work. You can go to his website, buy his books, subscribe to his email list to get his prolific essays, and you can subscribe to his Rumble and Telegram channel. Please support the work of Mordechai Sonis and Frontline News. You'll see the links below. And one note, Rav Kook, I think is the first Rav Kook, said, in order for the world of truth to appear, the world of lies has to be destroyed. It seems to me, and in order for the world of lies to be destroyed, all those U-boats under the water can't be destroyed with depth charges. No one would see it. They have to be forced to surface and then blown out of the water. It seems to me, it just seems to me that we are watching the ever accelerating implosion, explosion, and destruction of all Amalekite and Erev Rav systems worldwide on the simple level that more and more people all over the world are saying, oh my, that's really going on. And as Lincoln said, you can fool all of the people some of the time, and some of the people all of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. And for the Nimrods of today, the punks, the pimps, the prostitutes, the bullies, the cowards, the tyrants, the nobodies, the nothings, that's all that they are. They're really terrified because that's happening. And those systems are all based on fear. You can't kill everybody, whether you're Mao, you're Stalin, you're Hitler, you're Ceausescu, you can't kill everybody. And even if you would want to, your troops might not be willing to carry out those orders. So you have maybe 5% muscle and 95% fear. Those systems are breaking down worldwide, and the people responsible for real crimes against humanity and humanity's God are really starting to get nervous because they, including right here, we would never get away with it. We're so powerful. We're masters of the universe. We're little man gods. No one can touch us. And they're just starting to think, well, wait a minute, Houston, we might have a problem. The answer is yes, you do. And that's why this seminar and several others we have, before the name of the seminar, it says Jerusalem War Crimes Trials, then Medical Fellowship, Jerusalem War Crimes Trials, Erev Rav and Amalek Research Fellowship, and on abortion. There's a couple of others. We are coming for you. How? Simply by telling the truth. And if we're not here to deliver the message, others will come. And hopefully, we will live to see Mashiach ben David arrive to take care of the Erev Rav and Amalek. Yes, Nuremberg 2.0 worldwide. And how do I imagine Mashiach? I mean, who knows if we'll live to see him. I don't see a Rebbe with a long beard and Bubi and Tatala. I see Don Corleone with a kippah. And for the people in positions of power here, most of whom should not be here, including in the state rabbinate, his arrival will not be a time for rejoicing. Okay, having said that, you can click on the links below and please support yours truly's work to build our Hebrew Bible-based Fifth Israelite Monarchy Broadcasting Network from Jerusalem, Israel, to honor the Godland, Torah, and people of Israel, humanity. If you want to know what the Fifth Israelite Monarchy is, go look at the book of Daniel, chapter 2, verse 44, English, Hebrew, and the commentaries. There's nothing un-Jewish for the Jews out there about reading the Tanakh. Even it might be a Chiddush, you could try it. The ceiling won't collapse. It's a habit you could get into. Hanania told me that in two rabbis in the yeshiva, one of the yeshiva said that's Bittul Zman.
No, they actually said it's Bittul Torah. They said it's Bittul Torah. Bittul Torah, to study Tanakh.
I didn't grow up religiously observant, it's probably just as well. And the way I started learning things, I just started reading over and over and over. You know, like Lucille Ball and her friend Ethel on the assembly line with the chocolate balls. Let them roll. You just keep trying to pack up those guys, read it over and over. Hafuchbo v'hafuchbo ki kolbo. Like Mordechai said, give them that old-time religion, the Torah, the prophets, the writing, of course, our sages and commentaries. It's all there. Okay, I think I've said enough, and we will see you all hopefully in a week.